There is a country in Africa that most travelers cannot name, cannot place on a map, and have certainly never considered visiting, and yet it contains landscapes so otherworldly that NASA scientists have used them to test equipment meant for the surface of Mars. That country is Eritrea. And it is only the first stop on a journey through some of the most staggering, least visited places on the planet. Places that exist in a strange kind of geographic witness protection, hidden not by walls or borders, but by reputation, by rumor, by simple bad luck in the lottery of global attention. Why do some of the most beautiful places on Earth remain almost completely empty of tourists, while far less remarkable destinations drown in crowds? The answer is not what you'd expect. It has very little to do with beauty, and almost everything to do with fear, politics, and the strange herd-like psychology of where humans decide to point their cameras. Let's start in the Danakil Depression, which stretches across Eritrea and into neighboring Ethiopia. This is one of the hottest, lowest, most geologically violent places on the surface of the Earth. A depression sitting more than 100 meters below sea level, where the crust of the planet is so thin that lava lakes glow permanently at the surface, lighting the night sky an impossible orange. Sulfur deposits paint the ground in shades of yellow and green so vivid they look digitally altered. They are not. This is simply what the inside of the Earth looks like when it gets too close to the outside. Salt caravans still cross this landscape exactly as they have for centuries. Camels loaded with slabs of mineral salt, walking for days through heat that regularly exceeds 50 degrees Celsius, guided by men whose families have made this same brutal crossing for generations. There is no glamorous way to describe what this work costs the human body. And yet, ask any of these salt traders if they would trade this life for an office, and the question itself seems to confuse them. This is not a fallback. This is not a place people end up. This is where they choose, again and again, to return. Why has almost nobody heard of this place? Eritrea spent decades sealed off from the rest of the world, first by a brutal 30-year war for independence from Ethiopia, then by one of the most restrictive, closed-off governments on the continent. Journalists rarely get in. Tourists, for years, barely could. The result is a country that simply vanished from the global imagination, not because it lacked anything worth seeing, but because the door was locked from the inside. Quick pause. I recently started this channel to take you to the world's most extraordinary and hidden places. We're still at the very beginning, so every subscriber really matters. If this kind of content helps you understand the world better, consider subscribing. It helps me keep exploring and bring you even more breathtaking destinations and make even better videos. Thanks. Now let's keep traveling together. Travel 2,000 kilometers south, and the story repeats itself with a different cast of characters and an even stranger twist. Malawi is a country wrapped almost entirely around a single enormous lake, Lake Malawi. A body of fresh water so large it functions almost like an inland sea, and so biologically strange that it contains more species of fish than any other lake on the planet. More than 1,000 species of cichlid fish alone, the vast majority of which exist nowhere else on Earth. Scientists call it an evolutionary laboratory. Snorkel into its clear, warm water, and you are looking at a level of biodiversity that rivals coral reefs, except almost nobody is looking. Why? Because Malawi sits in the shadow of louder, more famous neighbors. Tanzania has Kilimanjaro and the Serengeti. Zambia and Zimbabwe share Victoria Falls. Malawi has no single iconic landmark that fits neatly onto a postcard, no single image that travel algorithms have decided to push into everyone's feed. So Malawi quietly became what locals themselves call the warm heart of Africa. A nickname that has nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with a level of hospitality. Travelers who do make it here describe almost identically, as if comparing notes on the same strange, wonderful secret. A fisherman named Joseph, who has worked these waters since childhood, will tell you that the lake taught him patience before his own father did. He talks about the lake the way some people talk about family, with frustration, with gratitude, with a complexity that only comes from real, lived relationship rather than admiration from a distance. The lake has nearly drowned him twice. He has no intention of fishing anywhere else for the rest of his life. That is the pattern beginning to emerge here, and it is worth pausing on because it is going to repeat itself again and again throughout this journey. The places nobody visits are not lesser. They are simply unbroadcast. And the people who live in them have a relationship with their home that is deeper, stranger, and more complicated than anything a postcard could ever hold. Now travel to the opposite corner of the world, into the mountains of Tajikistan. Specifically, the Pamir region, sometimes called the roof of the world. Peaks here rise above 7,000 meters. Glaciers feed turquoise lakes that sit at altitudes where the air itself feels thin and sacred. Villages exist here that are reachable only by a single road carved into the side of mountains so steep that the road itself seems to be making an argument with gravity and frequently losing. The Pamiri people who live in these high valleys practice a unique, mystical branch of Islam. Blended over centuries with older Zoroastrian fire traditions that predate the religion by more than 1,000 years. Walk into a traditional Pamiri home, and you will find a roof built with a specific ancient architecture, a stepped skylight structure called a chid that allows smoke to escape and light to enter, designed not just for function, but to represent, symbolically, the layers of the universe itself. Most Pamiri families can explain every symbolic layer of their own roof. Most people from anywhere else in the world have never thought about their own ceiling at all. Here is the strange twist nobody expects. This remote mountainous region was, for nearly a century, completely sealed off. Not because of war, not because of poverty, but because it sat directly on the most sensitive military border of the Soviet Union. An entire population lived in near-total isolation, not by their own choice, but because two global superpowers decided their mountains were too strategically important for outside eyes. The isolation that today makes the Pamirs feel untouched and mystical was, for decades, a geopolitical prison with breathtaking scenery. Only since the 1990s has this region slowly opened to the wider world. Which means everything you are looking at, the unbroken traditions, the architecture, the fire ceremonies still practiced exactly as they were 1,000 years ago, survived. Not because the modern world forgot about it, but because the modern world was, for once, forcibly kept out. There is one more stop on this journey. And it might be the strangest of all. Because this is a place that should, by every reasonable expectation, be one of the most visited destinations on the planet. And yet remains almost entirely empty. Socotra. An island floating in the Arabian Sea, technically part of Yemen, separated from the African and Arabian mainlands so long ago, roughly 6 to 7 million years, that evolution simply went somewhere else here. A third of all plant species on Socotra exist nowhere else on Earth. The dragon's blood tree, the island's most iconic resident, looks less like a tree and more like an umbrella designed by an alien with a sense of humor. A thick, twisted trunk supporting a dense, flat canopy engineered by millions of years of evolution to capture every drop of the island's scarce fog and rain. Cut the bark and dark red sap weeps out. The source of the tree's name, once so prized that ancient civilizations believed it held magical and medicinal powers. Why does almost nobody go? Because the word Yemen appears in every search result, every flight booking, every government travel advisory, and Yemen, the mainland, has been gripped by civil war since 2014. Socotra itself has remained almost entirely untouched by that conflict, geographically and politically distant from the fighting, protected by the same isolation that shaped its impossible biology. But perception doesn't check geography before it decides to be afraid. The name alone is enough to keep the world away. Quick pause. I recently started this channel to take you to the world's most extraordinary and hidden places. We're still at the very beginning, so every subscriber really matters. If this kind of content helps you understand the world better, consider subscribing. It helps me keep exploring and bring you even more breathtaking destinations and make even better videos. Thanks. Now let's keep traveling together. The people of Socotra, fewer than 60,000 of them, speaking their own ancient Socotri language found nowhere else, live among these alien trees with a relationship that goes back further than memory. A local guide named Salim will walk you through a forest of dragon's blood trees at sunset, when the light turns the canopies the color of dried blood and the whole landscape looks less like Earth and more like the concept art for a planet that doesn't exist. He'll tell you, almost as an aside, that his grandfather climbed these exact trees as a boy. The trees were already centuries old then. They are stable, unhurried witnesses to human lives that pass beneath them like weather. So here is the real question, the one underneath everything we've just traveled through. If beauty alone determined where humans choose to go, every one of these places would be overwhelmed by visitors. They are not. Tourism, it turns out, has never really been driven by beauty. It is driven by story, by fear, by algorithm, by the strange momentum of which destinations happen to get talked about, and which quietly slip through the cracks of the global conversation. Every place in this video survived its own invisibility. Eritrea survived isolation imposed by war. Malawi survived being overshadowed by louder neighbors. The Pamirs survived isolation imposed by superpowers who never asked permission. Socotra survives even now on the strange mercy of geography, outrunning a war it has nothing to do with. And in every single one of these places, something else survived too. Something that the most visited destinations on Earth have slowly, quietly lost. A relationship between people and their land that has never been diluted by the presence of outsiders. Traditions that were never performed for cameras because there were no cameras to perform for. A version of beauty that exists entirely for its own sake, with no need for anyone, anywhere, to ever validate it by showing up. Maybe that is the real lesson hidden inside every empty, breathtaking place on this list. The most beautiful things in this world were never waiting to be discovered. They were simply being lived, quietly, completely, by people who never needed us to notice. We noticed anyway, and somehow that makes it feel even more sacred.